I walked into the kitchen yesterday to get something to eat, and I said to my dad, "I'm hungry," and my dad said to me, "Hi, hungry, I'm Dad."
Well, we were having dinner and Dad spilt his peas on the table. He looked at me and said, "Oh no, I think I just peed on the table."
I was 10 years old when I said to my dad, "Hey Dad, I think I'm going to go get a haircut." He looked at me right in the eyes and said, "Which one?"
Dad asked me the other day, "Have you ever seen the movie Constipation?" I was like, "What?" He's like, "It never came out."
"Hey Dad, can you make me a sandwich?"
What did your dad say?
"Abracadabra, you're a sandwich."
Hey! Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing today? Hey, happy Father's Day. Happy Father's Day. Everyone doing good? Awesome. Hey, how many of you in this room, you're like, you are a dad joke survivor? Amen? All right. Now, real quick, how many of you in this room are proud to be dishing out the jokes because you are the funniest guy alive? Amen? Right here. All right. Okay. So real quick, for those of you who don't know, my name is Pete. I'm the creative arts pastor here. Hey, Mesa Online. We're so glad you're joining us today. And I had this special opportunity today, right? Happy Father's Day to all the fellas in the house. Woo, woo, woo. Today, I know there's a lot of ladies in this room, but today it's all about the guys. It's all about the guys. Come on, guys. Man. They're like, "Where's the meat?" I heard that there was meat after service today. That's right. And so I want to say thank you to every guy in this room today. One, for representing what it's like to be a young man or a man of God. And for those of you who are fathers, for those of you who are dads, for those of you who are maybe father figures to someone, I want to let you know that we appreciate you. I appreciate you. I want to celebrate you. And we honor you today. And not just today, but really, may we honor you with our life in every single thing that we do. And so, as we dive into today, people need affirmation. Amen. People need encouragement. People need affirmation in order to step into the blessing that God has. How many of you would agree? Amen. Amen. Now, built on the inside of every single one of us, we're all wired for affirmation. We're all wired for encouragement. Before you were formed in your mother's womb, you were known by God. He knows everything about you. He knows the number of hairs that are on your head and maybe which one you chose to cut, like that poor kid. But He knows everything about you. And so I want you to look at your neighbor today, and if you're online and you're sitting next to someone today, I want you to look at your neighbor and say, "You are enough." Go ahead and just tell them that. Come on, say that. You are enough. I love it. She was hitting her man right there like, "You are enough." Come on. See, you are enough. And the reason why I'm saying this today is because there are places where I know, because I'm there. We're saying this today because I know that there are some of us in this place who do not feel like we're enough. There are some of us in this place today who do not feel like or who do not believe that they're enough. And so my desire for today on this wonderful Father's Day is for you and I to walk out of here knowing that we are enough because God is enough. Amen? I want to say thanks to my brother Jared for just sharing what God put on his heart because it's right in line with everything today. And so in order to do that today, For most of you guys who know me, I like being really creative with certain things. And so as we dive into this today, I want to walk you through a visual illustration of this process and what I've titled the dark room. Come on. There it is. The dark room. Now, here's a question I have for you, and some of you are like, what is the dark room? Some of you are way too young that you have no idea, that you literally feel like, what is it, a dark room? Is it California when the blackout happens? Is it, For those of you who know a dark room, what is the dark room? A dark room was used in the process of taking film and turning it into photographs. A process that was used to bring things that were imprinted on film and making it become a visual illustration that was a reality. See, this dark room was made completely dark to allow the processing of light. Sensitive photographic materials, including film and photographic paper. Inside of this dark room, you would have found an enlarger. There would have been specialty paper, a safe light, developing stations filled with different types of chemicals to process and develop your photos. And the room was filled with red and amber lighting. So can you turn to your neighbor and say, welcome to the dark room? See, inside this dark room, they would print the roll of film on contact prints. And then they would process it through a process called immersion. And then they would take that print and then put it into a stop bath, followed by a photographic fixer. See, this print was then washed to remove any of the processing chemicals and then hung to dry. Some additional photos or some additional things were also used to process the photos by bringing different tonal qualities and adding different effects and adding different shades and colors. And so today, as I welcome each and every single one of you to the dark room, I want to talk about developing a faith in God's timing. And we're going to jump into a story that a lot of us know today, and with it being this Father's Day, I really wanted to dive into this, and I was praying about it and saying, God, what is it that you would have me to share for all of the people that are listening to this today and into the days to come? See, we're going to jump in and talk about the process of a dark room with two people by the name of Jesse and David. Jesse and David. See, here we have the people of Israel, right? The people of Israel who are so desperately wanted a king to lead them that what do? They asked the prophet Samuel, can you find us a one to lead our people? We want a king. Well, God is your king. No, we want a physical king that we can see so that they can lead us into what God has. So Samuel goes and finds Saul and anoints him. Saul started out well, but then he began to be disobedient. He began to operate in fear, and he was full of pride. Ultimately ignoring the instructions from God that came through the prophet Samuel. See, back in the Old Testament times, these prophets were acting as the voice of God because God would speak through the prophets, and then that's how the prophets would then communicate to the people. And ultimately, because of Saul's disobedience, because of Saul's pride, it then led to him removing himself from the blessing of God put on his life to lead his people. And so now God calls Samuel to select a new king. Everyone say a new king. And so today we're going to jump into 1 Samuel 16. If you've got the Mesa Church app, you can follow along with me. We'll have the notes and stuff on the slide or on the screen, different things there. But we're going to read out of the New Living Translation. And here we go. Everyone ready? Before we do that, let's pray. God, I thank you once again for your presence that is here in this place. God, we thank you that you have showed yourself to us and that, God, you are As we sit here in this moment in what we would call the dark room, Lord, help us to understand how you are processing things in our hearts and in our lives. Because I believe truly in my heart that every single one of us in here, every single person who is listening to the sound of my voice, God, may we understand the truth that we are enough because you are enough. So speak to us today as we get into your word, and it's in your precious name we pray. And everybody said, Amen. Amen. So 1 Samuel chapter 16, verses 1 through 13, and this is how we're going to flow through it today, so just follow along with me, right? Here we go. So verse 1, it says, Now the Lord said to Samuel, You have mourned long enough for Saul. I have rejected him as king of Israel. So fill your flask with olive oil and go. Everyone say, Go to Bethlehem. Find a man named Jesse who lives there, for I have selected one of his sons to be my king. Now here's the deal. When I read the Bible, when I read God's word, I love to study the passage, right? So we're going to go through 13 verses today, and I love to study those 13 verses. But then I also understand, I need to understand how it's wrapped. This is a present. So what happens in the beginning? What happens after? Because then it gives me a full context of how to really see and perceive what I'm reading and what is God trying to communicate to me. So when I look at these passages, especially like when I'm just doing devotions or when I'm preparing a message, I lay out all the verses and I find, what are these key words? What are these things that God is like, boom, hits you right in the face? That's how it works for me. That's how I've been doing it for years, and this is how I asked the Lord to speak. And so when I was reading this, I asked the Lord, God, what is being communicated to me now? How many of you know that names have meaning? That names are important. You see, the Lord here in verse 1 is saying to Samuel, it's time to stop mourning. Did you catch that? He says, you have mourned long enough. Like the people of Israel, some of us have dreams and desires that we thought would dictate how God should act, yet they've not turned out the way that we think they should. Maybe some of us have things or people that are not leading us to honor God in our very lives, but they're actually drawing us further away from Him. Maybe some of us have stuff that we've laid our stake in the ground, wishing and hoping for things to be different. Maybe we're mourning because people, places, or situations are not like what they were. Does that sound like anyone's mail today? Maybe you're looking in the mirror and feeling like you've missed out, and that opportunities have passed you by. Maybe you've lost all hope. Whether you be a father, a son, a daughter, a husband, a wife, a man, or a woman, you've lost it. And just like God said to Samuel, He's saying to us today, you have mourned long enough. It's time, church, it's time to fill up your flask. It's time to fill up your flask with oil and go. It's time to allow God to give you a new life, a new hope, a new energy, a new purpose, a new vision, it's new dreams. It's time to allow God to empower you for the days ahead, to understand that you are not finished. He is not done with you, and that your best days are yet to come. No matter how old you are, whether you're 20-something sitting in the seats or you've been walking with Jesus for 60 years, He is not done. And He's calling every single one of us to walk into a process which is what we would call the dark room. And it's not a fun process sometimes. It's not a great opportunity sometimes that we would think. But He's asking us, He's calling us to fill up our flask with oil, to say, Holy Spirit, here is my life. Everything I surrender and I give it to you. Would you overflow in me? Holy Spirit, fill us anew today so that we can go. So what does Bethlehem mean? Right? The Lord instructs Samuel to go to Bethlehem. What does Bethlehem mean? It means house of bread. See, in John 6:35, Jesus is referred to, He says that He is the bread of life. It was in this small town called Bethlehem that Gentiles were married into the Jewish nation by the example that we have read before. For those of you guys who you were here when we did a study through the book of Ruth. Ruth and Boaz. Perfect example that reinforces what happens here. Jesus was born for the world to hunger no more. He is the Bethlehem. He is the house of bread. He is our bread of life. And we continue in verse 2. But Samuel asked, how can I do that? If Saul hears about it, he will kill me. Then he says, take a heifer with you. That's a cow for those of you who don't know. Lived in Indiana for a long time. So the Lord replied, and say that you have come to make a sacrifice to the Lord. And then he tells Samuel to invite who? Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you which of his sons to anoint for me. So Samuel did as the Lord instructed, and when he arrived at Bethlehem, the elders of the town came trembling to meet him. What's wrong? They asked. Do you come in peace? Yes, Samuel replied. I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. So he says, purify yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice. Then Samuel performed the purification rite for Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice too. So who is Jesse? Jesse's lineage can be traced all the way back to Abraham. God chose Abraham and promised to Abraham that he would what? Have many sons, right? That his lineage would outnumber the stars in the sky. He promised that all the nations of the world that would flow out of Abraham would be blessed. And then when you look, Boaz from the book of Ruth demonstrates God's love and redemption because he married Ruth. And Jesse is the grandson of Ruth. And that's how he comes into the picture. Now Jesse was an ordinary guy, ordinary man. He was a farmer, he was a shepherd. There's not a whole lot that is described about who Jesse is, but when you look at the times and you look at the customs and how things were run, you are ultimately able to glean just a couple of different things. And so that's who Jesse was. But here's the other part. Jesse had how many sons? Anybody know? Some of you are saying 7. He actually had 8. Right? In that time, to have that many sons was considered what? Prosperous. It was a blessing. It was a gift. It was favor. So Jesse, he's mentioned also, as you look through God's word, he's mentioned as a stump. The stump of Jesse from which Jesus would come to be the Savior of the world. In Micah, it identifies Bethlehem as the little town of Jesse. Aww. Oh, little town of Jesse. Yeah, that doesn't work, right? Now, Jesse shares in the line that would ultimately be connected to God's salvation for everyone. We cool? We getting this? You guys learning something today? Amen. In verse 6, he says, when they arrived, Samuel took one look at Eliab and thought, surely this is the Lord's anointed. But the Lord said to Samuel, don't judge his appearance or height, for I have rejected him. The Lord doesn't see the things the way that you see them. People judge for outward appearances, but the Lord looks at the heart. Then Jesse told his sons in verse 8, his son Abinadab to step forward and walk in front. Could you imagine? All right, Abinadab, come on. Your other brothers were denied, right? Why don't you walk in front of Samuel and see what happens? What does he do? Abinadab walks in front. And Samuel says, next, right? Next, Jesse summoned Shimea, but Samuel said, neither is this the one the Lord has chosen. In the same way, all 7 of Jesse's sons were presented to Samuel, but Samuel said to Jesse, the Lord has not chosen any of these. That's hard. You think about it for a moment. To be rejected, to feel like, oh, the Lord hasn't, why not me? Right? Surely one of my brothers. You see, as we talk about the dark room, I want to encourage us with this truth today. How we see and process things is completely different than what God sees. Let me say that again. How we see and process things is completely different than what God sees. Are there things in your life today? Are there things in our lives that we thought we had a handle on, but then we've really just missed? Are there situations and moments that God is walking us through right now in the dark room that maybe require us to take a step back for a moment. Asking God, what is it that you really want me to see? Because ultimately, may we come to the Lord saying, God, give me your heart. For that's what you truly desire, a heart that yearns after you. Help us to know that things aren't always measured by what we can see. Because I will be honest, the older and older I get, the things that I see end up failing. And I'm not just talking physically, spiritually. May we have the heart of God. Help us, Lord, to not miss out on opportunities because we were too focused, catch this, to see what you are doing. Sometimes you can be so focused on the wrong thing and miss what God is actually trying to do. Then we jump into verse 11. Then Samuel asked, are these all the sons you have? I love that. Hey, Jesse, are these all the sons you have? And how does Jesse respond? Catch this. Well, they're still the youngest, Jesse replied. But he's out in the fields watching over the sheep and the goats. Matt. Send for him at once, Samuel said. And catch this, we will not sit down to eat until he arrives. See, David wasn't even invited to the party, but they were looking for him. The whole entire process of God selecting a new king for the people of Israel was, guess what? It came to a halt. It stopped because David wasn't even in the room. Change happens when you're present. Some of you are saying, maybe might be sitting here today saying, you know what, Pete, I've been struggling, I've been wrestling with certain things, I've been coming to God and praying and asking God to do something, asking God to show himself, asking God to give me his heart. When in reality, God just wants you to be present. But some of us, we sit on the excuses, we sit on the ideas and the feelings of thinking that we were rejected or thinking that we were denied, and we miss out. When God is just saying, you need to be present. You know, it took me a lot of years to get over the fact that my real dad was not present. It took me a lot of healing and a lot of reconciliation and a lot of wounds that had to be uncovered for me to understand that my physical father may have failed me, but God stepped into the place of who he needed to be because of who he is and who he meant to be for me. And even when my first child was born, my son Jaden, I wrestled and I struggled. I thought I was a good man. I loved my wife. I loved the Lord. But yet all of these fears and insecurities started to come out of nowhere. And I just started wrestling with questions. Well, Pete, you didn't have a good example. You didn't know what you're doing. Think about what happened in your life. You're going to do the same exact thing. And I'm like, why am I wrestling? I literally had like a midlife crisis at the birth of my first child. Because God had to work me through the dark room and through a process for me to understand, to change my heart. See, don't get so caught up in the different things because God wants us to be present in order for change to happen. Amen. You can rewrite your story. You can start a new legacy. You can have a new beginning when you're fully present. And just because what culture says and what your past says, it doesn't define you and it doesn't dictate what happens next. So be present. There are some of the fellas in here, you know what, you're a little defeated. Maybe things aren't going as well in your marriage. Maybe things aren't going as well in your relationship with your kids. But can I just encourage you just to be present? To find time. Make time. It doesn't have to be all planned out. You don't have to do all the bells and whistles and fireworks and all those different things. Just be there. Figure out a way to be present because that's when the change will come. You see, one of the things that we learn out of this dark room experience through Jesse and David is that God shows his favor for you in hidden moments. You see, his father, Jesse, I love this. Samuel asks, is this all your sons? Is this all you have? And what does he do? He describes David by his condition. One of the people that knew him the most, his dad, talked about him and described him by what he had done. I felt convicted because there are times in my life when I talk about the blessings that God has given me or the people that God has put in my life by the things that they have done. When in reality, when Samuel asked, is that the only son that you have? Or Jesse should have responded, well, there's my son David. Don't get so caught up in the doing that you forget about the knowing. Amen. Come on, church. Amen. Don't get so caught up in the doing that you forget about the knowing. Our kids need to be remembered by our relationships, not by their accomplishments. Accomplishments are great, but they're a dime a dozen. Because when the relationship is gone, when the relationship is fleeting, when the relationship was once grasped and now that it's no longer there, what do you hold on to? The presence. Being present. Not only do our kids need to be remembered, but people want to be known. They want to be known, not what they're known for. That goes for life in general. So we jump into verse 12. So Jesse sent for him, and it describes David as dark and handsome and beautiful eyes. And the Lord said, this is the one, anoint him. So as David stood there among his brothers, Samuel took out the what? The flask of oil he had brought and anointed David with the oil. And then it says, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David from that day on. Then Samuel returned to Ramah. See, David was forgotten about, but God knew. God saw him. He said, this is the one, anoint him. If you feel like you were missed or forgotten about, know that God sees you. Don't forfeit the plans that God has for you by removing yourself out of the equation. Only you can make a difference in the places that God has placed you. Only you can make a difference in the moments because God has equipped you to pour yourself into the people that He's placed in your life. But Pete, you don't understand. I've missed it. I've failed. I've struggled. I'm wrestling. I don't feel confident. I don't feel like I'm equipped. People may even get frustrated because they cannot move forward until what? You show up. I mean, could you imagine Jesse and all of his and David's brothers that were there in that moment, and here they are, Samuel is looking for a king, and he's like, hold up, wait a minute. We got to put David in it, right? Like, where's David? And some people will end up getting so frustrated because they're not feeling like they're able to make some progress. And God's like, of course you're not going to make progress because there's a person who I've specifically called that needs to be present in this moment. How many of you know that when you're present, there is healing that can take place? There are new things that can spring forth. We have to be present. See, you're the reason why some things cannot move forward. You might be the reason why some things cannot move forward. You might be the very one that God wants to use to bring change. But in order for that to happen, you got to show up. See, even though we may be in the dark room, there's a new faith that I believe is on the rise. There's a reminder of truth and love and encouragement that only can come from God. And what other things can we learn from this passage today? What other things can we learn when we understand that God is walking us through a process in our very own life of being in the dark room? What are the things that we can learn? See, godly opportunities are found in the shadows. Everyone say shadows. See, David was anointed king in private. His opportunities were found in the process. Who in this room, actually I can think of some of you right now, that would say this like lovingly, because this is like your love language. So, who in this room loves processes? I knew it. Some of the hands that went straight up. I was thinking of you guys. So some of us were gifted with the love of process. But some of us were tried. We struggle with process, right? See, most of us, we actually dislike the dark room because of the time that it takes to develop the process. Some of us, especially with it being 2023, we are so used to, God, where's my DoorDash opportunity? When are things going to show up? Where's that same day delivery? God, I want my Amazon Prime and I want it now. If it's not done in 2 days or less, I'm getting a refund or I'm going somewhere else. We laugh, but it's so true. You know, I used to think of these things, and even to this day, there are some times where I'm guilty, where I'm like, God, I just want the process to be over now, and I want it right now. But as I'm 40 years old, I look back and I see, wow, God, I would have never understood this whole process that you've taken me through right even up until this moment. And things look a whole lot different now than what I thought they would. But I had to commit to the process. Even when I didn't want to, there had to be some breaking that took place. There had to be some different things that God had to work in my life. You know, some of us, we think that God's purpose needs to be developed in short times. But what does God want us to do? You know, He wants us to be faithful. But some of us, we stay faithful for a week and then we wonder why God never showed up. Now, here's the deal. We know that salvation happens within an instant. Salvation, new life, forgiveness of sins, all of those things, being made new and accepted into the family of God happens within an instant. For those who come to accept and to know who Jesus is. Not just as a cool guy, not just as someone who died for us, not just as someone who washed away our sins, but someone who is actually Lord. Who is over all, who cares, who knows all things. Salvation happens in an instant, but sanctification, it's a process. It's a dark room. We all have stuff. We all have some of these things that take time. But what about those who hated on me? What about those who forgot about me? What about the dad that was my real dad in my life who wanted nothing to do with me? What's the process in all of that? They got to know. I want to tell them so I can show them who's boss, right? Pride. But guess what? They're ultimately going to know. But it will never come about in the ways that you think. Only when God says. See, where did David go? Literally, David is anointed king. Not with a whole crowd, not with a party celebration, not with all the festivities and all the different things. He's got to do this in quiet because if Saul finds out, guess what? But where did David go after he was anointed? He went back into the field, back into the place where he knew that God had called him to be. See, your struggles become your strengths. When no one is watching you, your weakness will become your strength. Your struggles, guess what? They're not supposed to knock you out. They're not supposed to give you the KO. You're not supposed to walk in defeat because of the struggles. You may have been hurt, but your purpose will develop your strengths. God, continue. Lord, help us continue to develop our hearts. God, help us to continue to develop what? Our character. See, Psalm 73, verse 26 says this, my health may fail and my spirit may grow weak, but God remains the what? Strength of my heart. If you're weak today, God, give me your heart. Because you will be my strength. See, your character can be perfected until it's ready. See, before David was king, right, he was what? He was a shepherd. He was a musician. He was a writer. He was skilled with a slingshot. Long before David faced Goliath, he faced a lion. He faced a bear. Tigers, oh my. See, some of us were trying so hard to prove ourselves to the world before it's time. Do you find yourself struggling to make a dream a reality? Do you struggle to find yourself making these aspirations actually come true? Do you find yourself wrestling and pushing so hard, trying to figure out why God isn't working certain things out, only maybe to realize, you know what, maybe God's not actually in that? See, it's not about being famous. And I know in our culture today, everybody wants to be Insta-famous. Everybody wants social media followings. They want to do all of those different things. They want the recognition. They want the applause. They want all of the approval. They want all of those different things. But guess what? It's about developing character. It's about developing your craft. Some of us, we want to be great, but we don't want to put the work in. But if you would just invest, if you would commit yourself in time, Exodus 35 verse 10 out of the New Living says this, "Come all of you who are gifted craftsmen, construct everything that the Lord has commanded." I love that verse because it's talking about all of the creatives. It's talking about all of those who are gifted, who are equipped, who are skilled even. It doesn't say, hey, come everybody who can just swing a hammer, right? You know, if I'm wanting an amazing dinner, a pasta dinner with meatballs and all these different things, I'm not going to call up a guy who just knows how to swing a hammer to make me food. Develop your skill, develop your craft. Some of us, we've got to figure out how to prioritize the moments that we get in the dark room to say, you know what, Lord, what is it that you're trying to develop within me? How can I be better? Because the way that God has equipped you, the way that God has wired you, guess what? God will use that to be a blessing to someone else. God will use that to equip you to be a light in the dark for someone else. But you've got to develop it. You've got to invest. You've got to personalize these things and say, Lord, lead me. Give me the strength. Give me your wisdom. Give me your insight. Don't run away because you don't understand. Don't run away because you think you just can't get it. Invest. Can we learn to be content right where we are in the dark room? Can we allow God to develop our character and refine who we are? You see, in closing, this is what I want to share. So the team can come back and just play softly for me. God develops your negatives in the dark room. Some of us, we have disqualified ourselves or we've put ourselves out of the equation because of our negatives. But the last time I checked, it's those negatives that are processed in the darkroom that become images of God's faithfulness. You see, we have, right? Remember those sayings back in the day, the Kodak moment? It's a Kodak moment. For those of you who are like, a Kohu? I just thought that was a t-shirt. They used to have these little reels that had film processed inside, and then the developer would take this film into the dark room, and they would go through a process because the developer knows what he's doing. Because here's the reality, if you took that film and you exposed it to light, if light were to get on the imprint, guess what? It would overexpose the image. It would throw off the identity of what it was supposed to be, of what it was supposed to have. You know, we've all got stuff, and maybe you've wondered and forgotten what God has given to you. But can I encourage you today, you know what? Maybe it's time to step back into the dark room. Maybe it's time to step back into the presence of God. See, allowing God to develop you, allowing God to show you the world, or allow God to show the world who He is in and through you, because your best days are in front. God will ultimately give you a new purpose and opportunities if you just gain the right perspective. But don't force your way out of the dark room. Don't force your way and say, you know what, I just want to take my stuff and I want to take what you're doing in my life, God, and I just want to show everybody now. Because it's got to go through the process. God has to work out the different things. God has to work on your character. God has to work on your heart. God has to take your weaknesses and make sure that they actually become your strengths. Because there's nothing more that the enemy would want to do is than to kill, steal, and destroy. The enemy would want nothing more to do than to then show your flaws to the world. Because his idea to combat all of that is to say, you know what, oh, he's got flaws, they've got struggles, they've got weaknesses, cancel. The enemy would want nothing more than that, but God is saying, if you would just trust me, if you would just get into my presence, if you would just rest, if you would allow me as your developer to process and work out the things in your life in this dark room, good things will happen. Lives will be changed. History will be changed because of the new course that He has set before you. You don't have to live in your past. You don't have to be labeled by the things that have happened, by the things that you've done, by the experiences and things that have happened to you. But you can walk. You can live out His purpose, the faith that He gives you because it's in His timing. Don't force your way out of the dark room. See, I had moments in my life where I tried to force my way. And there were some times I got out, and the prince and the things that God wanted to do in my life didn't turn out so well because it was all in my own strength. But when I get into the presence of God and I learn how to rest underneath the shadow of His wings, things happened. My life was drastically changed. I can look at my life and understand, you know what? I'm supposed to be a statistic. I'm supposed to be a young man who had a dad who left when he was 2, who grew up in an alcoholic home and drug addicts and all of these different things, who was actually threatened. You guys. And I was threatened and all those different things, but guess what? Those things didn't define me. Those things didn't stop me. It's because God's presence was in my life. And I want to encourage you today, you are enough. God's presence is here. He is for you. You don't have to get everything perfect, but you can just say, God, here I am. Work on my heart. I trust you. In this dark room, I'm fighting it for so long, but can I tell you, when you stay in God's presence, the snapshot of the things that will develop in your life, I would have never seen it coming. I would have never seen it happen. But only God did. Only God knew who would be impacted because of the imprints of God's presence on my life. And now I have the opportunity because of a new legacy, a new lineage of what God is doing, and I trust my kids into His hands. I trust my marriage into His hands. I trust my job, my role, my responsibilities, and say, God, it's all yours. Can I have all of the fellas stand up? All of the guys. See, David sought the face of God. Listen here. He sought the face of God, and what did he do? He continued to do the last thing that the Lord instructed him. And when it was time, what happened? when it was time, when God saw that it was time, they sent for David. Hey, David, you need to visit your brothers. Okay, they're on the battlefield. Bring them some food. What did David do? He brought the food, but then he saw the giant. He saw Goliath, and he said, Goliath, you're talking mean about my God, and I can't stand for it because there's a purpose, there's a destiny, there's a development, there is a character, there is a heart. There is a heart that cannot be shut up, cannot be contained. And so I want to tell you this, guys. If you're comfortable with it, if not, it's so cool, but I believe in blessing. I believe that each and every single one of us, we have purpose and we have influence. You know, Jesse, out of the stump of Jesse, Jesus came. And even though Jesse may have messed up in those moments, he wasn't defined by that. God saw past that because of who was in Jesse's life, because of who came through Jesse's life. He may have had those moments, but think about this. God blessed Jesse with 8 sons. There are some of you in here today, God has blessed you, but you just don't recognize it. And I want to tell you today, this is the time because God's presence is here. His Spirit is here, the flask is full, and it's time to anoint, and it's time to go. So could you just stretch your hands out to the Lord in this place today? And you would just repeat after me. Say, God, here I stand. Help me to see how you see. Give me your eyes. Give me your heart. Lord, I don't want to walk out of here the same. But Lord, I want to be more like you. If there are things that I've overlooked, if there are things that I've said, yeah, no, help me to see what the process is in the dark room. God, I want to experience your presence. I want to experience who you are. So move in my life. Move in my relationships. Move in my home. Move in my workplace. God, move in my lineage. Whatever it may be, here I am. Here is all of me. I give it to you. And all of the fellas said, amen. Amen. Can we give the Lord some praise today in this moment? And this is the last thing I want to do. I know we're going to get ready to wrap up here in just a moment, but I really feel impressed by this. Men, God loves you. You know what I'm talking about. God loves you. He loves you. You are enough. He has equipped you. And even if He is processing things in your life right now in this moment, may it not stop you from continuing to be a blessing to others. Because what's in your hands, there is power. What's in your hands, there is anointing. What's in your hands, there is purpose. And who you are, God will use you to speak new life and even identities into those who are lost. Because I was that 12-year-old, 13-year-old boy who was completely lost, and God sent a man who was fearful of the Lord, who loved Jesus, and He spoke life into me. So don't let the enemy downplay the influence and the impact that you can have because of who He is in you. Amen? Amen. Let's go ahead. If we've got our prayer teams, if you guys want to come to the sides, and You know, if you would say, hey, you know what? God is speaking something in my life. I want to encourage you guys to do that. Where's Rick? There's Rick. Can I have you, Rick? Just come on up, man. And the band's going to play softly, and we'll just create some space. But let's go ahead. Rick, why don't you just close this?